Hello, my friends. I am back again. And today we are going to be doing chapter 26 of The Yearling by Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings. I will tell you that this is an extremely long chapter. So I may do this in two parts because it is so long. However, hopefully I can get them on today. So here we go. Chapter 26 of The Yearling. The cow freshened the week before Christmas. The calf was a heifer, and there was rejoicing on Baxter Island. It would take the place of one of the wolves, of the one the wolves had killed. Trixie was no longer young, and it was necessary to raise a heifer soon to replace her. There was little talk at the house except of the coming Christmas. Now that this calf was born, the whole family would be able to be away for overnight on Christmas Eve, for the nursling would take care of the milking. Ma Baxter baked a fruit cake in the large Dutch oven. Jody helped her pick out hickory nut meats for it. It took all day to bake it. For 3 days, the cake was all there was of life. A day for preparing it, a day for baking it, and the day after for admiring it. Jody had never seen a cake so huge. His mother bulged with her pride. She said, "I don't go to the doings often, and when I do go, I am not to go scarce." Penny presented her with the black alpaca the evening the cake was done. She looked at him and at the material. She burst into tears. She dropped into a chair and threw her apron over her head and swayed back and forth with every appearance of grief. Jody was alarmed. She must be disappointed. Penny went to her and laid his hand on her hair. He said, "'Tain't the lack of will I don't do sich as that for you all the time." Jody understood then that she was pleased. She wiped her eyes and gathered the alpaca in her lap and sat holding it for a long time, now and then stroking it lengthwise. She said, "Now I got to move quick as a black snake to get this made in time." She worked day and night for 3 days, her eyes bright and contented. She was forced to call on Penny for help in the fitting. He knelt humbly, his mouth full of pins, and took up and let out as she directed. Jody and Flag watched, fascinated. The dress was done and hung under a sheet for clean keeping. 4 days before Christmas, Buck Forrester stopped by. He was good-humored, and Penny decided that he had imagined any mistrust. Old Slewfoot had visited Forster's Island again and had killed a 250-pound blue male hog in the nearby hammock. The kill had been in battle and not for food. The hog had put up a mighty fight, he reported. The ground was torn up for yards around. One of the boar's tusks was broken off, and the other was wrapped with old Slewfoot's black fur. "It's a good time to come up with him," Buck said, "for he belongs to be hurt." They themselves had not discovered the kill until the day after it had happened. It had been too late to follow. Penny thanked him for the information. "I reckon I'll set a trap inside the lot just to scare him," he said. "We all are fixing to go to the river for the doings," he hesitated. "You fellers coming?" Buck, too, hesitated. "I reckon not. We don't fool much with them Volusia Jessies. No fun going if we wasn't drunk, and Lim'd likely pick a fight with some of Oliver's friends. No, reckon we'll get Christmas drunk to home, or maybe Fort Gates." Penny was relieved. He could not imagine the distress of the river folk if the foresters had rolled into the prim and Christian gathering. He oiled his largest bear trap. It was 6 feet in width and weighed, he said, nearly 6 stone. Now, stone is 20 pounds. So 6 stone is 6 times 20, which is 120 pounds. So this trap weighed 120 pounds. That's a big trap. The chain alone weighed 2. So the chain weighed 40 pounds. He planned to shut the cow and the calf together inside the stable, barricade the door, and set the trap just outside. If old Slewfoot came to make Christmas dinner of the new heifer while they were all away, he would have to take the trap first. The day passed busily. Jody polished again the necklace of Cherokee beans. He hoped his mother would wear them with the black alpaca. He had nothing for a gift for Penny. He worried and puzzled, and in the afternoon went to a low place where the pipe elders grew. He cut a reed and made a pipe stem, and cut a bowl from a corn cob, and fitted it. The Indians who had once been here had made pipe stems of the reeds, Penny had told him, and he had always meant to make one for himself. He could think of nothing for flag. He admitted to himself that the fawn would be satisfied with an extra piece of cornbread. He would make him a halter of mistletoe and holly. That night, Penny stayed up after Jody had gone to bed. He occupied himself with a mysterious pounding and slapping and scraping that had something to do, no doubt, with Christmas. The 3 days left seemed like a month. Not one, not even the dogs, heard any sound in the night. When Penny went into the lot in the morning to milk Trixie, and then to the calf stall to turn it in to the mother to nurse, the calf was gone. He thought it had broken down its bars. They were intact. He went into the soft sand of the lot and studied it for tracks in a straight line across the crisscross of cow and horse and human trails. The track of old Slewfoot stretched inexorably. Penny came to the house with the news. He was white with anger and frustration. "I've had a bait of it," he said. "I mean to track that creature down if I follow him clear to Jacksonville. This time it's me or him." He went immediately at the business of oiling his gun and preparing shells. He worked rapidly, his manner grim. "Put me some bread and taters in a bag, Orry." Jody asked timidly, "Can I go, Pa?" "If you can keep the pace with me and not holler quits. If you give out, you got to lay where you fall or come back on alone. I ain't stopping for nightfall." "Must I shut up Flag or leave him foller?" "I don't give a blasted rap who follers. Just don't nobody look for me for mercy. Do the going get rough." He went to the smokehouse and cut strips of gator tail for the dogs. He was ready. He trudged through the yard to the lot to take up the trail. He whistled for the dogs and put Julia on the track. She bayed and was off. Jody looked after him in a panic. His gun was not loaded. He had on no shoes, and he could not remember where he had left his jacket. He knew from the set of Penny's back that it was useless to beg him to wait. He scrambled about, gathering up his belongings. He shouted to his mother to put bread and potatoes in his shot bag, too. She said, "You'd like to be in for it. Your pa's locked horns with that bear. I know him." He called to Flag and tore madly after his father and the dogs. Their pace was swift. He was out of breath by the time he caught up to them. Old Julia was jubilant on the fresh trail. Her voice, her merry tale, her easy lope showed plainly that this was the thing above all others she wished to be doing. Flag kicked up his heels and ran beside her. He'll not be so frisky, Penny said ominously. Do old Slewfoot raise up in front of him. A mile to the west, they found the remains of the calf. The old bear, kept perhaps by his injuries inflicted by the forester's boar from recent hunting, had eaten heavily. The carcass was well covered with trash. Penny said, He's due lay up not too far away, figuring on coming back. But the animal followed no rules. The trail continued. It led nearly to Forester's Island, swung north and west, and skirted Hopkins Prairie to the north. The wind was strong from the southwest, and Penny said that it was almost certain old Slewfoot was not far ahead of them, but had winded them. The pace was so rapid and the distance so long that in the late morning even Penny was obliged to stop for a rest. The dogs were willing to continue, but their heavy sides and hanging tongues showed that they too were weary. Penny stopped on a high live oak island by a clear pond on the prairie for the dogs to drink. He threw himself on the ground in the sunlight. He lay on his back without speaking. His eyes were closed. Jody lay down beside him. The dogs dropped flat on their bellies. Flag was unwearied and pranced about the island. Jody watched his father. They had never come so hard and so fast. There was not the joy of the chase, the careless pitting of man's brain against creature's speed and cunning. This was hate and revenge, and there was no happiness in it. Penny opened his eyes and rolled over on his side and opened his shot bag and took out his lunch. Jody took out his own. They ate without speaking. The biscuits and cold-baked sweet potatoes seemed almost savorless. Penny threw a few strips of the gator meat to the dogs. They gnawed contentedly. It was all one to them whether Penny hunted casually or with a desperate intent. The game was the same, the strong, sweet trail, and the good fight at the end. Penny sat upright and swung to his feet. All right, time to get going. The siesta had been brief. Jody's shoes were heavy on his feet. The trail led into scrub, then out again, back to Hopkins Prairie. Old Slewfoot was trying to shake the dogs. Their scent still came to him. Penny was obliged to stop twice in the afternoon to rest. He was furious. Dog take it. Time was I didn't have to stop, he said. Yet each time that he set out again, his walk was so fast that Jody was tired out from following him. He dared not say so. Only Flag frisked and frolicked. The long trek was a casual jaunt for his long legs. The trail led almost to Lake George, cut back sharply south and again to the east, lost itself in the dusk of the swamp. The sun was setting, and visibility was low in the shadows. Penny said, He's fixing to come back and feed on that calf again. We'll go home and fool him. The distance back to Baxter's Island was not great, but it seemed to Jody that he could never make it. On any other hunt, he could have said so, and Penny would have waited for him patiently. His father moved toward home as doggedly and relentlessly as he had left it. It was dark when they reached it, but Penny at once loaded the great bear trap on the slide, hitched Caesar to it, and dragged it to the side of the kill. He allowed Jody to ride on the slide. He himself walked beside Caesar, leading him. Jody stretched out his aching legs with relief. Flag had lost interest and hung around the kitchen door. Jody called, Ain't you tired, Pa? I don't get tired when I be this mad. Jody held a fat wood torch for him while he lifted the ragged carcass with sticks in order to leave no human taint, baited the trap and set it, and scratched leaves and rubbish over it with a pine bough. Penny squatted on the slide for the ride home, dropping the reins and following old Caesar to pick his own way. He put up the horse and found gratefully that Ma Baxter had done the milking. They went to the house. Hot supper was on the table, and he ate quickly and lightly, then went directly to his bed. Ori, what'd you take to rub my back with panther oil? She came and worked on him with big, strong hands. He groaned with the comfort of it. Jody stood watching. Penny rolled over and dropped his head on the pillow with a sigh. How you making it, boy? Had enough? I feel good since I ate. A boy's strength rise and fall on his belly, Ori. What? I want breakfast before crack of day. He closed his eyes and was asleep. Jody went to bed and lay a moment aching. Then he too passed beyond hearing of Ma Baxter clattering in the kitchen, laying out materials for the early breakfast. He slept through the first sounds in the morning. He awakened still drowsy. He stretched. He was stiff. He heard his father's voice in the kitchen. Evidently, Penny was in the same grim mood as yesterday and had not even thought to call him. He got out of bed and pulled on his shirt and breeches and went sleepily to the kitchen with his shoes in his hand. His hair was shaggy in his eyes. Penny said, Morning, feller. You ready for more? He nodded. That's the spirit. He was too sleepy to eat much. He rubbed his eyes and dallied with his food. He said, It ain't too soon to see? Ain't it too soon to see? Time we get there, it'll just be soon enough. I aim to creep up on him, do he be suspicious and just sniffing around. Penny rose and leaned a moment on the table. He grinned wryly. I'd feel right good, he said, if my back wasn't broke smack in two. The black morning was bitter cold. Ma Baxter had made up the wool from Jacksonville into hunting jackets and jeans for both of them. They seemed too fine to wear, but walking slowly through the pine woods, they wished they had put them on. The dogs were still sleepy and tired and were willing to follow silently at heel. Penny put his finger in his mouth and lifted it to test any imperceptible stirring of air. There seemed to be none, and he went in a direct line toward the baited trap. It was in a place that was comparatively open, and he halted 100 yards away. That's the size of a football field. Day was breaking in the east behind him. He slapped the dogs lightly, and they dropped to the ground. Jody grew numb with the cold. Penny was shivering in his thin clothes and ragged jacket. Jody saw Slewfoot in every stump and behind every tree. Interminably slow, the sun rose. Penny whispered, If he's catched, he's dead, for I've heard nothing. They crept forward with lifted guns. The trap was exactly as they had left it the night before. There was not light enough to make certain of the tracks, to determine whether the weary creature had come and been suspicious and gone away. They rested their guns against a tree and swung their arms and stamped their feet to warm themselves. If he's been here, Penny said, he ain't far away. Old Julia'll jump him right quick. The light was without warmth, but it spread through the forest. Penny walked forward, bent low to the ground. Julia was sniffing silently. Penny said, I be dogged. I just be dogged. Even Jody could see that the only tracks were the day-old ones. He ain't been anywhere near, Penny said. He wouldn't follow a rule to save him. He straightened and called in the dogs and turned back for home. Anyways, he said, we know where he left off yesterday. He did not speak again until they reached the house. He went to his room and pulled on his new wool hunting clothes over the old thin ones. He called to the kitchen, Ma, put me up a meal and bacon and salt and coffee and all the cooked rations you got. Put 'em in the knapsack and scorch me some more rags for my tenderhorn." Jody tagged after him. "Must I put on my new things too?" Ma Baxter came to the door of the room with the knapsack. Penny paused in his dressing. "Now, boy, you're plumb welcome to go. But get this in your head and get it in good. This is nary pleasure hunt. It's cold weather, and it'll maybe be hard going and cold camping. I just ain't coming home again till I get that bear. Now, you still want to go?" "Yes." "Then get ready." Ma Baxter glanced at the sheet over the black alpaca dress. "You'll be gone tonight?" "More'n likely. He's got a night start on me. Maybe tomorrow night, too. Maybe a week." She swallowed. She said weakly, "Ezra, tomorrow's Christmas Eve." "Can't help it. I got a right fresh trail to follow, and I'm taking it." He stood up and fastened his braces. His eye caught the look of misery on his wife's face. He pursed his mouth. "Tomorrow's Christmas Eve, eh? Ma, you'd not be afeard to drive the horse and wagon to the river in daylight, would you?" "No, not in daylight." "Then if we ain't back tomorrow by the time to make it, you hitch up and go on. And if there's a chance in the world, we'll come on to the doings. You milk 'fore you go, and if we don't make it in, you'll be obliged to come on back next morning and milk. Now that's the best I can do." Her eyes were moist, but she went without comment and filled the knapsack. Jody waited his chance when she went to the smokehouse for meat for Penny. He pilfered a quart of meal from the barrel and hid it for Flag in his own new knapsack made of the hides of the panther kittens. It was the first time he had carried it. He stroked it. It was not as soft as the albino coonskin knapsack he had given Doc Wilson, but the blue and white spots were almost as pretty. Ma Baxter returned with Penny's meat and finished the packing. Jody stood hesitant. He had anticipated eagerly the Christmas doings at the river. Now he would miss them. His mother would be glad to have him stay with her, and he would be considered honorable and even unselfish for doing so. Penny slung his knapsack over his shoulder and picked up his gun. Suddenly, Jody would not be left behind for all the festivities in the world. They were out to kill old Slewfoot. He swung his little knapsack over his own warm wool shoulder and picked up his gun and followed his father with a light heart. They cut directly north to pick up the trail where it had ended the evening before. Flag made a sortie into the brush. Jody whistled shrilly. "Hunting's a man's business, ain't it, Pa? Even on a Christmas." "It's a man's business." The track was still fresh enough for old Julia to keep it without pause or difficulty. It led east only a short distance beyond the point where they had left it, then turned sharply north. "Just as good we didn't follow it last night," Penny said. "He was making for other counties." The trail swung west again toward Hopkins Prairie and ran into wet marsh. It was difficult to follow. Old Julia splashed through the water. Now and then she lapped it, tasting it, seemed the very scent of it. Again she laid her long nose against the rushes and stared vacantly, deciding for herself on which side of the rank fur had brushed them. Then she was off again. She lost the scent entirely at times. Then Penny cut back to firm land and followed the line of the marsh to watch for the great rubbed track where it came out. The great nubbed track where it came out. If he found it before she struck, he called her with the hunting horn and put her on it. "Here he goes, gal, here he goes, get him." Rip, with his short legs, followed Penny. Flag was everywhere. Jody asked anxiously. Flag ain't no hindrance, is he, Pa? Not a bit in the world. Did a bear wind him, he'd pay him no mind, less'n it was to turn around and come to him. In spite of Penny's grimness, the hunt began to take on the old delight. The day was crisp and bright. Penny slapped Jody on the back. This is better'n Christmas play dollies, ain't it? I mean, the cold food at noon tasted better than most hot dinners. They sat and ate and rested under the good strong sun. They loosened their jackets. When they rose to go on, the knapsacks seemed heavy for a time. Then they became once more accustomed to them. It seemed for a time that old Slewfoot meant either to make a wide circle back to Forrester's or Baxter Island, or to continue straight across the scrub to new feeding grounds on the Ocklawaha. Let me see if I can say that better. Ocklawaha. Ocklawaha. I don't know how they say that in Florida because it's an Indian name. It's a Native American name, which I really wish I knew what it meant. If Forrester's hog hurt him, Penny said, he sure don't give a tinker's damn. Irrationally, in mid-afternoon, the great tracks turned back into the swamp toward the east. The going was rough. Minds me of the time last spring you and me tracked him through Juniper Swamp, Penny said. In the late afternoon, they were not far, he said, from the lower reaches of the Salt Springs Run. Suddenly, old Julia gave tongue. He would bed up in such a place. Julia dashed forward. Penny began to run. She's jumped him. There was a crashing ahead as though a storm broke through the denseness. Get him, gal. Hold him. Yippee! Get him. Yippee! The bear moved with incredible speed. He crashed through the thickets that slowed the dogs. He was like a steamboat on the river, and the dense tangle of briars and thorny vines and fallen logs was no more than a fluid current under him. Penny and Jody were sweating. Julia gave tongue with a new note of desperation. She could not gain. The swamp became so wet and so dense that they sank in muck to their boot tops and must pull out inch by inch with no more support perhaps than a bull-briar vine. Cypress grew here, and the sharp knees were slippery and treacherous. Jody bogged down to his hips. Penny turned back to give him a hand. Flag had made a circle to the left, seeking higher ground. Penny stopped to get his wind. He was breathing heavily. He panted. He's like to give us the slip. When his breath came more easily, he set out again. Jody dropped behind, but across a patch of low hammock found better going and was able to catch up. The growth was of bay and ash and palmetto. Hummocks of land could be used for stepping stone. The water between was clear and brown. Ahead, Julia bayed on a long, high note. Hold him, gal, hold him. The growth dissolved ahead into grasses. Through the opening, old Slewfoot loomed into sight. He was going like a black whirlwind. Julia flashed into sight, a yard behind him. The bright, swift waters of Salt Springs Run shone beyond. The bear splashed into the current and struck out for the far bank. Penny lifted his gun and shot twice. Julia slid to a stop. She sat on her haunches and lifted her nose high in the air. She wailed dismally in misery and frustration. Slewfoot was clambering out on the opposite shore. Penny and Jody broke through the low, wet bank. The black, rounded rump was all that was visible. Penny seized Jody's muzzle loader and fired after it. The bear gave a leap. Penny shouted, I touched him. Slewfoot continued on his way. There was a moment's crashing as he broke a path through the thicket. Then even the sound of him was gone. Penny urged the dogs desperately. They refused flatly to cross the wide creek. He threw up his hands in despair and dropped down on his haunches in the wetness and shook his head. Old Julia rose and snuffed the footprints at the edge of the bank, then sat down and took up her lament where she had left it. Jody's flesh quivered. He supposed the hunt was done with. Old Slewfoot had given them the slip again. He was astonished when Penny rose, wiped the sweat from his face, reloaded both guns, and set off northwest along the open edge of the run. He decided that his father knew a less tangled way of returning home. Yet, Penny kept to the creek, even when open pine woods showed to their left. He dared not question him. Flag had disappeared, and he was in a panic for him. It was part of his bargain not to whimper either for himself or the fawn. Penny's narrow back was stooped with weariness and discouragement, but it was a back of stone. Jody could only follow with sore feet and aching legs. The old muzzleloader was heavy across his shoulder. Penny spoke, but rather to himself than to his son. Now I seem to remember her house yonder. The edge of the creek began to lift to high ground. Oaks and pines towered against the sunset. They came to a tall bluff overlooking the run. There was a cabin at the top of it and a cleared field below. Penny climbed the winding path and walked up on the stoop. The door was shut, and no smoke came from the chimney. The cabin had no windows. Wooden shutters over square openings served the purpose. These were drawn closed. Penny walked around to the back of the cabin. A shutter here was ajar. He looked in. She ain't here, but we'll go in all the same. Jody asked hopefully. Will we go home from here tonight? Penny turned and eyed him. Go home? Tonight? I told you, I'm going to get that bear. You can go home. He had never seen his father so cold and implacable. He followed after him meekly. The dogs had lain down in the sand by the house, panting. Penny went to the woodpile and chopped wood. He gathered an armful and dropped it through the shutter opening. He climbed through after it and unbarred the kitchen door from the inside. Jody went back to the woodpile and split off a handful of fat wood splinters and brought them in and laid them on the floor. A Dutch oven and iron kettle stood or hung on cranes at an open hearth. Penny kindled a fire and hung a shallow kettle over it. He opened his knapsack on the floor and took out the slab of bacon and cut slices of it into the kettle. It began to sizzle slowly. He went outside to an open well and drew up a bucket of water on the windlass. He took a stained coffee pot from a shelf in the kitchen and made coffee and set it close to the growing blaze. He stirred up a corn pone in a barred pan. He laid 2 cold-baked sweet potatoes near the fire to warm through. When the bacon had fried, he scraped the cornmeal batter into the grease, turned it in a solid cake when it was brown, and turned the crane away from the blaze to finish the baking. The coffee boiled. He set it aside. He took cups and plates from the rickety safe and set them on the bare deal table. Draw up, he said. It's ready. He ate quickly and hungrily and took what corn pone seemed likely to be left and gave it to the dogs outside with 2 more strips each of gator meat. Jody was cold with more than the evening's bitterness. He hated having his father so silent. It was like eating with a stranger. Penny heated water in the kettle he had cooked in and washed the cups and plates and put them back in the safe. There was coffee left, and he set the pot aside on the hearth. He swept the floor. He went outside and gathered armfuls of moss from a live oak and made a bed under a sheltered corner of the house for the dogs. The night was settling down, very still and bitter cold. He brought in logs from the woods and pushed the ends of two of them into the fire to be pushed forward from time to time, nigger fashion. He filled his pipe and lit it and lay down on the floor by the fire with his rolled knapsack for a pillow. He said kindly, "You best do the same, boy. We'll be setting out soon in the morning." He seemed more himself, and Jody dared now to question him. "You figure old Slewfoot will come back by here, Pa?" "Not him. Not for longer than I care to wait. I'm right certain he's wounded. I'm going up to Salt Springs and cross over above the head of the run, then down to the other side where he lit into the thicket this evening." "That's a heap of distance, ain't it?" "It's a fair piece." "Pa." "Well?" "You reckon Flag ain't come to no harm?" "You ain't forgot what I told you about letting him follow?" "I ain't forgot. Penny relented. "He ain't lost, if that's fretting you. You couldn't lose no deer in the woods. He'll turn up if he ain't taken the notion to go wild." "He'll not go wild, Pa. Never." "Not so young, anyways. He's likely tormenting your ma this minute. Go to sleep." "Whose house is this, Pa?" "Used to belong to a widder woman. I ain't been here in a long whiles." "Will she keer us coming in?" "If it's a woman used to be here, she'll not care. I come all round courting her before I married your ma." "Go to sleep, Pa." "Now you got one more question coming to you before I take a brush to you. And if 'tain't a question with sense to it, I will anyway." He hesitated. The question was whether Penny thought they could possibly reach the Christmas doings the next night. He decided that the query was not sensible. Following old Slewfoot was probably a lifetime job. He brought his thoughts back to Flag. He pictured him lost and hungry and followed by a panther. He was lonely without him. He wondered if his mother had ever been so concerned about him, her only son, and doubted it. He went with some mournfulness to sleep. He was awakened in the morning by the sound of wagon wheels in the yard. He heard the dogs bark and a strange dog answer. He sat up. Penny was on his feet, shaking his head to clear it. They had overslept. The sunrise lay rosy about the cabin. The fire had burned to embers, and the charred ends of two logs still extended over the hearth. The air was like ice. Their breaths hung in frosted clouds. They were chilled to the bone. Penny went to the kitchen door and pulled it open. A step sounded, and a middle-aged woman came into the room, followed by a youth. She said, "For the Lord's sake." Penny said, "Well, Nellie, looks like you can't get rid of me." "Ezra Baxter, now you could wait to be invited." He grinned at her. "Meet my boy, Jody." She glanced at Jody quickly. She was a pretty woman, plump and rosy. "He favors you a mite. This here's my nephew, Asa Revels." "Not Matt Revels, boy. I'll swear. Why, boy, I knowed you when you was no bigger than a dirt dauber." They shook hands. The youth looked sheepish. The woman said, "Now you're so mannerly and all, Mr. Baxter. You could tell me how come you're making free of my house." Her tone was jovial. Jody liked her. Women ran in breeds like dogs, he thought. She was of Grandma Hutto's breed. That made men easy. And two women could say the same words, and the meaning would not be the same as the bark of two dogs, one menacing and the other friendly. Penny said, "Let me get us a fire going. My breast's too froze to talk." He knelt by the hearth, and Asa went outside for wood. Jody followed to help. Julia and Rip were moving with stiff tails around the strange dog. Asa said, "Your dogs like to scare Aunt Nellie and me to death." Jody could think of no suitable response and hurried into the house with wood. Penny was saying, "If you never been an angel from heaven, Nellie, you was one last night. Jody and me and the dogs has been trailing a big nub-tooted bear 2 days steady. He killed my stock one time too many." She interrupted. "A bear with one toe gone off his foot? Why, he's cleaned me out of hogs the past year." "Well, we trailed him clear from home and jumped him in the swamps south of the lower end of the run. If I'd had 10 more yards on him, I'd have had him. I shot after him 3 times, but he was too far. The last time I stung him, he swum the creek and the dogs wouldn't take the water. Well, Nellie, I never been so near give out since the time you told me Fred wanted to keep steady company with you." She laughed. "Oh, go on with you. You never wanted me. It's too late to commit myself." "Well, I knowed if you hadn't married again and moved off, your place was up here summers. And I knowed you'd not begrudge me your floor and hearth. And when I had laid down to sleep last night, I said, 'God, bless little Nellie Ginwright.'" She laughed out loud. "Well, I don't know nobody's more welcome. But next time I'd not have such a start did I know ahead of time. A widow woman ain't used to strange dogs in the yard, and a man by the hearth. What you fixin' to do now?" "Soon as I eat a bite of breakfast, I'm fixin' to cross the run above the head of the spring and take up the trail on t'other side where we last seed him." She knitted her forehead. "Now, Ezra, no need to do that. I got an old dugout right above here. It's mighty sorry and season cracked, but he'd carry you across the creek. Take it and welcome, and save the miles." "Hi, yippee, you hear that, Jody? Now, I got to say again, God bless little Nellie Ginwright. Not so little as when you knowed me. No, but you're heap better looking now. You was always purty, but you was too thin. You had legs like a buck-rub sapling." They laughed again together. She took off her bonnet and bustled about the kitchen. Penny seemed now in no great hurry. The distance saved by the use of the dugout to cross the creek gave them time for a leisurely breakfast. He donated the rest of the bacon. She cooked grits and made fresh coffee and biscuits. There was syrup for the biscuits, but no butter or milk. "I can't keep stock here," she said. "The gators gets what the bears and panthers don't." She sighed. "A widow woman's hard put to at times." "Asa here don't live with you?" "No. He just came back with me from Fort Gates, and he's going to the dunes at the river with me tonight." "We was aiming to go too, but I reckon we just as good forget it." A thought struck him. "But now, my wife'll be there. You tell her you met up with us so she'll not be fretted." "You're just the kind, Ezra, would worry what was his wife fretted. You never asked me, but I often figure I made a sorry out of it not encouraging you." "And I reckon my wife figures she made a sorry out of it doing so." "None of us don't never know what we want till it's maybe too late to get it." Penny was judiciously silent. Breakfast was a feast. Nellie Ginwright fed the dogs generously and insisted on putting up a lunch for the Baxters. They left reluctantly, warmed in body and spirit. "The dugout's less than a quarter up the run," she called after him. There was ice everywhere. The switchgrass was coated with it. The old canoe was embedded in it. They broke it loose and launched it. It had been out of water a long time. It leaked so fast behind their efforts that they gave up bailing and got in to make a dash for it. The dogs were suspicious of the boat, and as fast as Penny lifted them into it, they jumped out. In the wasted minutes, the canoe acquired several